Hey, good afternoon. We are live today. Thank you for joining us. We are looking at algebra mistakes and some of the common mistakes that we make when we're trying to teach or lead students through algebra. So that's the topic at hand today. Before we get into it really quickly, just hey, share this out. Give us a like, give us a thumbs up, share this out to other friends that might notice it. We always are running into people that have never heard of our material. They find us, they said they've never heard of us, and so they wondered where we've been. So we don't do a lot of formal advertising anymore because most of our word is word through mouth. Word of mouth. So, which we're probably going to keep it that way too. So we're depending on you to share with the people that's relevant. So today, what we want to talk about though is, oh, by the way, before we do anything further, we have a special that is going on for this month. We should stick that in the comments. I think that's Algebra 2 and Trig, not the topic necessarily today, but what we're going to be talking about is just some of the common questions we get about algebra, in particular teaching algebra, and the 5 common mistakes that we see from mom and dad as they're trying to, or actually in teachers and school systems too, as they're trying to lead their kids through algebra. So these are the 5 common mistakes in teaching algebra. So let me just kind of walk through these one by one. Some of these are interrelated. But the first mistake that we see is just not building a strong foundation. And I'm going to say this in a word that, because these words become charged, but in pre-algebra. And I don't mean necessarily a course in pre-algebra, but in the things that you did before you got into an algebra course, building a strong foundation in the basics. How do you add? How do you subtract? How do you multiply? Of course, those things. But fractions and negative numbers are probably the thing that makes most people crazy. So fractions and negative numbers. And if you look at the book that we use, is a lot of times we tell people they don't really need a formal pre-algebra course because those subjects are covered over and over in the years of just mathematics and whatever curriculum you use. But in the Harold Jacobs elementary algebra, he starts out and he's doing some of that. But you should have already had all of that. Usually the pre-algebra courses that you see are sort of a holding pattern. So how do you do this? But what happens if you get your son or daughter in and they are in algebra and you've got them and you suddenly start seeing them struggle with, hey, this looks like negative numbers. And the first thing you want to do is when you see things start to struggle, what's the struggle? It's not math in general. There can be math anxiety. People just don't like it. They're afraid of it. But it's not just math in general. There is a specific thing they don't understand, and just dive into that specific instead of just throwing everything away. It's kind of like if you have a leaky pipe at your house, and you're like, well, there's water everywhere. I should sell my house or burn it down. That's the same kind of approach people oftentimes take to teaching subjects, but do it analytically. What is the problem? So if you see a problem and if you are sensing, hey, they don't have the foundation they need, what is missing? That doesn't mean you throw away your entire curriculum, start your year over, and then buy another curriculum that goes back 1 year or 2 years and do that. Fill the void. If you're realizing, well, you know what, they're not real strong in fractions. Take a moment, take a week, take 2 weeks, whatever it is, get some things and just practice on fractions. Get them more familiar. If it's negative numbers, get them more familiar with it. And just deal with these problems as they come along instead of trying to do it in a curriculum. And that's why we don't really like pre-algebra, because it takes all the things you should have learned already before and then spends a year doing them. And most students are bored with pre-algebra, even if they don't like math. And by the way, that's a reason a lot of people don't like math, is because it becomes a really boring subject doing arithmetic, which is not very exciting. So I look at it as like diagramming sentences. If that's all you ever did in English and all you ever did was diagram sentences, I hated that. I don't know about you, but the point is to use it, to write with it, to read. So not building the strong foundation. So that's how you fix it, is when you sense it happens, just spend some extra time reviewing the topics, but get specific. There's a million resources out there on YouTube and on the web. We've got some resources that we're looking at offering to answer very specific problems or help solve very specific fundamental problems that show up over and over. But fractions is one that most of us, even grown people, struggle with, right? And the other one is negative numbers, just getting their head around that. So that's mistake number one: not building this firm foundation and not addressing it properly. Mistake number two, that is oftentimes, well, let me just state, skipping real world applications. And I'm going to say this a little bit differently too. Skipping word problems. Now, word problems strikes fear in many of the math students, because it will be something like, matter of fact, we were just looking at, some student had emailed a question about a word problem. You've got so much money, and you got $1.50, and you got 98 coins. It equals $1.50, and so many of them are quarters, and so many of them are nickels, whatever the numbers were. I don't remember. But that's a word problem where you are given words and you have to back into what's the formula. Now, we do this all of the time, and we do it naturally. Most of us, even those of us that are not math people, if you take somebody that's not a math person, and take them to a 25% or 10% sale, and they're calculating what that is, and they get good at it, you have built in your head, you don't realize it, but you're doing an algebra equation that you have figured out in your head. We do this when we cook. We do this, if you're a woodworker, we're constantly using these things. We use these real world problems in real world applications, and they're algebra. But we skip that. So students lose interest in math. And to me, this is a big problem with math in general, is because it's like grammar, right? The same thing as learning English grammar is like learning math. Learning English grammar so we can read and write. Learning mathematics so we can do science and business and understand the world around us, because basically all of science is mathematic driven. And of course, we know business is also. So it's a tool. And so getting us to start applying it, so what we want to do, how can we fix this, is we just want to incorporate real life examples all the time. Now, that doesn't mean we need to be writing down equations with X and Y, but understand, or help your student understand that these are mathematic equations. These are algebra equations. Real life examples: budgeting, planning trips, how many miles it's going to take, how many miles per hour that you're going to travel. So how long does it take to get there? Just things like this that we use basically all the time that are algebra. Measuring space. We're constantly in our home, probably many of you redecorate and constantly have tape measures out, measuring, can this sofa go here? Can I move this piece of furniture from one room to another? We are doing math, right? We're calculating, we're doing geometrical issues. So get your kids involved in that. Let them see that. And also help them. I mean, you don't need to make a lecture of it, but help them see this is math. It just is up the applied part. We're not sitting there, on problem number 27 out of chapter 3 doing it. So skipping the real world applications, skipping the word problems because they look hard and confusing is maybe a way to move a little bit faster, but you lose the whole point of what you're doing. So skipping the real world applications, don't do that. Don't do that. Bring that into math as much as possible, even if you are, and many parents will tell me, well, I don't understand that myself. And so anytime you are doing calculations with numbers, anytime you are making decisions where numbers are involved, which is very often budgeting, spending money, measuring, cooking, think about, am I doing math here? And you just because you're using numbers, you probably are doing math. So it doesn't mean, again, you need to, re-educate yourself in this, except for the fact to recognize you use math, you use algebra all the time. You just don't use it in the way maybe it was taught to you in school. So there's two things. Is number one, not building the foundation and the pre-algebra or the before algebra concepts and dealing with them properly, and then skipping the real world applications. So now number 3, boy, this one shows up a lot. Not breaking down problems into manageable steps. Usually when kids come out, and especially kids that are more ADHD, if you will, I don't know if that means anything, but we'll say boys probably more typically, they don't really like sitting down and writing down math problems. They don't even, 2 + 2 or anything. Just they hate to write things down. They can do it in their head. And that works, right? And they understand it. I know with both of our sons, when we would talk to them, they would understand the math. Trying to get them to write it down was painful for everybody involved. But when you get into higher levels of math, and algebra is beginning to cross to that, your head becomes overwhelmed in the multi-step problem. Part what we're trying to teach here is logic and logical thinking and step-by-step logic. And so we have to kind of teach our kids, and oftentimes that's where they're coming from, is they're coming from used to be able to look at the problem and solve it. And now they're coming into problems that are taking multiple steps. And I don't know about you, but most of the people I work with, and maybe most of my own problems, which have nothing to do with math often, is to stop and break down a problem into smaller steps, right? Because if you don't, you end up with the term we hear so often in our culture, overwhelm. Right. But when you stop and, going back to the leaky pipe issue, we could say the leaky pipe, we got to sell the house because there's water everywhere. No, you just have to step by step. What's the first step? Let's turn off the water. Let's stop the water from flowing. And then let's figure out what's going on, and just, take it step by step and assess what the problem is, and then how to fix the problem, even if you're not a plumber. Right. But, now the next step is to call somebody who knows how to fix it. But that's part of the step. The same thing happens in mathematics. When you have some more complicated things going on, you need to think about the steps. When we cook, there's steps that you are taking. And when we are going on a trip, especially if you're going on a trip and you're going to go, around and visit multiple places, there are steps in your head. There's calculations you've done for how much is it going to cost to stay here, how many miles are you traveling, how many hours is it going to take to get there. And you do this math all the time, and you break things into steps. And our kids need to learn to do that. And a lot of times in mathematics, the problems are big enough that it's easier when you break it into steps. And that's, we see that common in the support questions. We get people just kind of want to jump forward, and they don't take it step by step. They don't read what does this mean in the book, and understand it, because they're in a hurry. Um, and actually, they are faster to break it down step by step. But learning to do this on pen and paper is a skill. There's no question about it. It's a skill to be able to, just like it's a skill to write with our hands, it's a skill to type, on a keyboard. It's a skill to, structure a letter or a essay or anything else. There's a skill to structuring those things that you learn. And there's a skill the same way to break things down. So in algebra, in geometry, in math, you're seeing those skills because oftentimes you're not aware of it. The student's not aware of it. The author will have them break things down. Harold Jacobs' geometry is awesome about that, because by definition, the way he asks the questions, he breaks down the steps for you. And then you can realize, I just did 4, 5, 6 problems, but really it was one problem that he broke it down for us when he did it. So breaking down these things into multiple steps. So you want to teach your kids to think step by step. If they can't stand to write, just talk them through it. Just ask them, what's the first thing you need to do? What's the second thing you need to do? I know my wife, she would write things down because my son just didn't want to write. So she would write it for him, and they would do it on a whiteboard. But writing helps you have good logic, or thinking through the steps helps you have good logic and helps you avoid mistakes because of the assumptions that you make. So number 3 is not breaking down the problem in manageable steps. Now, so that's partly on teacher, that's partly on student, but you have to, I think a lot of times when we're a teacher, our tendency is to say, okay, we'll just do whatever is easiest, do it in your head, just write down the answer. And that does work. But there's a point to the process to learning how to do this. So mistake number 4 that we see, and we see this probably more with parents, but sometimes the students are involved in this, is just wanting to go faster, focusing on speed instead of understanding. When you're given a syllabus and you're given how many problems to work in a week, we just feel like the whole goal is to get through the problems. So what happens? Students rush through material. They will rush through chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. They won't really understand it, but they're surviving, if you will. They're getting through the material, but they don't. It will catch up to them because they really don't understand what they're doing. And this is what we call cookbook math. It's like going into a kitchen, and we open a cookbook. Most of us can cook. We can follow step by step. That doesn't mean we have a clue what we're doing. We don't know why putting salt in or putting milk in or putting a water in at this point matters. We're just following instructions. That doesn't make us a chef, right? But somebody who actually knows how to cook understands this, and certainly they may still follow a recipe, but they understand. And what we're looking at here is, do you understand the language? And that's what we're talking about. It's a foreign language, if you will. Do you understand the language of math? And just rushing through it, getting numbers on paper, getting the right answer, and saying, I got the right answer. I don't know how I did, which I've heard students say before. I don't know what I did. So encourage a student to take time to double check, to look for accuracy. And one of the big things that here I think that really helps a student understand stuff is to have them explain what they did and why. And that is a powerful tool. We all learn by teaching, and when you have to explain something, that's teaching. Then mistake number 5 is just not practicing. And it's like anything else in life. We don't do it. We don't know it. We forget it. This musical instruments, any kind of skill that we have, we're not growing in it. And since we're trying to educate and we're trying to get them to learn to move to the next level, they just need to be consistent. Now, it may be that you just need to build review into your schedule, just 10 or 15 minutes a day. Now, I'm not some people would say, well, during the summer, during time off, you should still be doing math, or maybe. I wouldn't go that far. I don't think you're going to totally forget it, but a lot of people will just we have noticed some people just will kind of put math to the end of the year, or we'll just put it last place. We'll put it at the end of the day, because it's the last thing we want to do, maybe, or whatever. If it's the last thing you want to do, we'll put it at the end of the day when your brain's kind of already fried. But building some consistent practice in here, and we're big advocates for, if somebody's doing more than an hour a day, that's just too much. Unless we spoke with a parent the other day that her daughter was self-motivated and spending hours a day on math, and as she's driving to try to finish the math and she's learning it and doing, that's different. That's a self-driven student. But for most parents, I think we're just sit down and do your math. You got an hour. But whatever time it takes, we ended up oftentimes using a timer and saying, can you do this for 15 minutes? And when that timer goes off, you're done. If you have to set it to 5 minutes, probably with some boys, you might have to set it with 5 minutes. But you just want forward progress. That's all we're trying to do, forward progress. So let me go back and recap, though. These are the big 5 that we see: is not building a strong foundation, or not correcting the issues as we see them. That's probably how that should be worded. Not stopping to correct the issues. Number 2 is skipping real world applications and word problems. Number 3 is not breaking down the problem step by step, and teaching your student to do that, to break down problems. Number 4 is focusing on speed. I don't care what your syllabus says, where you should be. The fact is, you should be moving forward. That's it. Don't worry about the timeline. Number 5 is not practicing. Just being consistent to work on it, just like you would piano or guitar or any kind of musical instrument. All right, so that's the 5 big things. Now, if these resonated with you and helping you make teaching easier, we have videos. We use the Harold Jacobs Algebra, the Harold Jacobs Geometry. Our advanced courses are using college textbooks, but we have videos that go through to help you teach this, syllabi for you to guide you. And again, not to tell you exactly what to do every day, but to guide the steps to take along the way. So once again, also we have 2 things on sale right here, and I see we've put those into the chat. Algebra 2 and Trig, everything you need, and Calculus, everything that you need to get through. 2 of our popular courses for people that are college bound and trying to get ahead of the game. All right. Thank you so much for joining me today. We do say again to give us a like, give us a thumbs up, or whatever that is on the Facebook. Give us and share this with others that you think could be using this, especially people that that might be struggling with their student in math, and just how can they get better success. So we will be back here again next week at 3 o'clock. Have a great one. Thank you.